All right, settle in. We're about to plunge headfirst into a period of history that is, frankly, a glorious mess of grand ambition, sprawling conflict, and the kinds of utterly bizarre, sometimes brutal details you only find when you dig into the accounts of someone who was actually there.
Yeah, the 6th century, specifically Justinian's reign.
We're talking about the age of the Emperor Justinian, a time when the Eastern Roman Empire decided to flex its muscles and try to reclaim what had been lost in the West, all while facing off against its ancient rival in the East.
And our primary guide for this particular expedition is Procopius of Caesarea, a historian who is remarkably well-placed, often accompanying the Roman armies or residing in key cities.
Right.
We'll be drawing primarily from his work, The Wars of Justinian, which gives us incredibly detailed, sometimes uncomfortably honest accounts of these campaigns.
And we've also pulled in snippets from other ancient texts, like Pseudo-Joshua the Stylite, and insights from modern scholarship to help us connect the dots and understand the context. Fill in some gaps, maybe. Exactly. Our mission today, our deep dive, is to unpack these sources, extract the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight, and journey across continents with Justinian's armies.
We'll explore the key figures, the brilliant generals, the ruthless kings, the tragic queens, the strategies they employed, and the surprising moments that define these wars across the Eastern Front with Persia. The wild landscape of North Africa against the Vandals and Moors, and the complex battleground of Italy against the Goths.
The goal here is to give you a shortcut to being genuinely well-informed about this absolutely pivotal era.
It's a period where the fate of vast empires hung in the balance, shaped as much by calculated strategies as by unpredictable events and the sheer force of individual personalities. There's immense human drama embedded in Procopius' accounts.
So let's unpack this. We begin our journey on the Eastern Front, facing the mighty Sasanian Empire, a power that was every bit the equal of the Romans, if not more so at times.
Definitely a major rival.
And the story here really starts with the Persian king Kavad, a figure with a fascinatingly complex path to the throne that tells us a lot about the instability of the time.
Kavad's early life was marked by significant upheaval. He was exiled at one point and found refuge among the Epsalatai, sometimes called the White Huns.
Right, the Ethelites.
And it's here, according to Pseudo-Joshua the Stylite, that we find a truly striking detail, one that gives us a glimpse into the brutal realities of exile and war.
Okay.
While among the Epsalatai, Kavad married the daughter of his own sister, who had been captured by the Epsalatai in the very war where Kavad's father, Perez, was killed.
Wait, he married his own sister's captured daughter. Wow. That's a detail that really sticks with you. What does that tell us?
Well, it's not just a bizarre anecdote. It's a key insight into the extreme length leaders went to secure alliances, often marrying into families, and the brutal breakdown of social norms and expectations during periods of intense conflict and exile. Survival and power sometimes trumped conventional morality,
Absolutely. So he eventually makes his way back and has to consolidate his power. And there's this interesting story about how he handled promises early in his reign, which reveals something about the tension between royal decree and established law.
Indeed. Procopius recounts that Kavad, perhaps feeling the need to reward loyalty quickly upon his return, made a promise to one of his friends. He would appoint the first man who came into his presence that day and offered his services as Khanerang.
The Khanerang, that was a big deal, right? Like a governor or general?
A very significant military and administrative office. Yeah, essentially a regional commander.
Which sounds simple enough, except he immediately regretted it because Persian law strictly forbade conferring such high offices based on anything other than right of birth.
Exactly. He was worried someone unsuitable, someone without the necessary lineage, might show up first, forcing him to choose between his word and the law. It's a bind.
Precisely. But fate, or chance, as Procopius puts it, intervened in a way that allowed him to keep his word without breaking the law.
Oh, how so?
The first man to appear was Adurgandad, a young man who was not only a relative of the previous Khanerang, Gusanistides, but also, crucially, an exceptionally capable warrior.
Ah, convenient.
Very. Adurgandad offered his services, Procopius says, addressing Kavad as Lord and being the first to offer him obeisance as king.
So because Adurgandad had the necessary lineage and was the first to offer service, Kavad was able to appoint him, fulfilling his promise and upholding the law simultaneously.
It's a neat piece of political maneuvering described by Procopius, but Kavad's path to the throne also involved removing his predecessor, Balazs.
A rather brutal removal, as Procopius details, and another insight into the ruthlessness of Sasanian politics. After Balazs had ruled for only 2 years, Kavad had him apprehended and ordered his eyes put out.
Oof. How did they do that?
The method Procopius describes was the common Persian one for criminals, either pouring fiercely boiling olive oil into the eyes or heating an iron needle in a fire and piercing the eyeballs.
It's just horrific.
And it wasn't just torture, as Procopius mentions elsewhere. Persian law forbade anyone physically mutilated from being king, so blinding was a specific, legally recognized way of making him politically ineligible to rule ever again.
Right, you mentioned that legal aspect, so it was a political move as much as punishment.
Definitely. Balazs was then kept in confinement. Kavad also executed Gusanastedes, the former Khanerang, solidifying a Durgandad's position.
And then there's this unique office created under Kavad, held by a man named Siyavush, which highlights Kavad's efforts to centralize power.
Ah, yes. Siyavush was proclaimed Adrastadair in Salanas, an office Procopius emphasizes was held by no one else before or after his time.
What did that title mean exactly?
This position put him in command over all magistrates and the entire army. It was an extraordinary concentration of civil and military power.
Wow.
Under Kavad's early rule, with figures like Durgandad securing the borders and Siyavush holding this unique command, the kingdom was indeed strengthened and, as Procopius says, guarded securely.
Okay, let's fast forward a bit to the actual military encounters during Justinian's reign against the Persians. We see Belisarius, who will become a central figure in the Western wars, active on this front.
Yes, he starts making a name for himself here.
Notably at the Battle of Darius, a major Roman victory, and later involved after a Roman defeat at a battle on the Euphrates.
Right. Darius was where Belisarius first made his name against the Persians in a large-scale set-piece battle. But it's after the battle on the Euphrates, an encounter where the Romans under Martin and Hermogenes suffered a defeat, that Belisarius' strategic thinking really stands out.
How so? He wasn't even there for the main battle, was he?
No, he wasn't even present at the battle on the Euphrates initially, but when he arrived with reinforcements after the Roman rout, he made a fascinating counterintuitive decision, one that gives us a key insight into his strategic mind.
He argued against pursuing the fleeing Persians. Why? On the surface, it seems like you'd want to capitalize on a victory or punish the retreating enemy as much as possible.
Exactly, and this is where Procopius records his detailed reasoning, which is remarkable for its prudence and long-term perspective. Belisarius laid out several points to his army.
Okay, like what?
First, he argued there was no real advantage to be gained, even if they were victorious in pursuit. Why rout an enemy who was already fleeing in disorder? The goal was to remove the immediate threat, which flight achieved.
Makes sense. Don't risk what you've already gained.
Second, and perhaps most important, he warned that if they failed in the pursuit and failure was always a possibility, they would lose the victory they already had. Not to the enemy, but by flinging it away themselves.
And leaving Roman territory wide open behind them if they were caught in the pursuit and defeated.
Precisely. He added a slightly more philosophical point too, suggesting that God likes to help men in dangers that are necessary, not those that they choose for themselves.
Interesting theological angle there.
Yeah, basically saying don't push your luck unnecessarily. He also noted the practical state of the Roman army. Many soldiers were on foot, everyone was fasting, and not the entire army was present.
So they were tired, hungry, and potentially outnumbered if the Persians turned.
Right, and he pointed out that fleeing enemies, when cornered and fighting for their lives, will fight bravely out of desperation. It was a compelling argument for restraint in the face of what seemed like an opportunity for further triumph, prioritizing security over potential glory.
It shows a commander thinking several steps ahead, prioritizing the security of the empire over immediate, potentially risky glory. That kind of calculated caution isn't always what you expect from a great general.
No, it's quite revealing.
Now, shifting gears to Kavad's successor, Chosroes. This is a figure Procopius paints with a much darker brush than Kavad.
Oh, yes. Chosroes is portrayed as highly ambitious, incredibly cunning, and frequently deceptive, with a notable disregard for treaties. All traits Procopius illustrates with specific examples.
Like how he initially snubbed Justinian.
Exactly. He initially refused to recognize Justinian after suppressing a revolt in Persia, despite Justinian having written to him, a sign of his arrogance and assertion of power. And his avarice is evident in incidents like the raid on Apamea.
Ah, yes, the Apamea story from Procopius Book 2. He had an agreement with the ambassadors for a sum of silver, but then broke it and demanded all the city's sacred treasures, vast amounts of gold and silver.
Procopius states quite pointedly that Chosroes forgot the agreement, willingly enough, and he believes Chosroes would have gone further, enslaving and plundering the entire city, had some divine force not manifestly prevented him. To such an extent did avarice govern him.
So Procopius really saw him as driven by greed.
Absolutely. It's presented as a key insight into Chosroes' character, a king prioritizing personal wealth and glory, which he thought came from enslaving cities, over the sanctity of agreements, which he saw as easily broken.
But he did yield on one thing in Apamea, didn't he? A small moment of humanity, perhaps.
He did. There's a poignant anecdote where Bishop Thomas, after Chosroes had seized all the gold and silver treasures, brought out the wood of the cross.
The true cross, or a piece of it.
A piece believed to be from it, yes. He displayed it and pleaded with Chosroes, saying, "O most mighty king, these alone are left to me out of all the treasures. This wood here, it is our salvation and precious to us. This, I beg and entreat you, leave to me."
And Chosroes agreed.
And Procopius notes that Chosroes yielded and granted the request. A small moment of restraint and a larger act of blatant disregard for treaties and human dignity.
Which Procopius uses to underscore Chosroes' character, citing his later disregard for agreements made at Daras and his actions at Callinicon during peacetime as further evidence of his untrustworthiness.
Absolutely. Chosroes had grander strategic ambitions beyond simply raiding Roman cities for wealth, although he certainly enjoyed that. A major focus was securing Lazique, or Colchis, in the Caucasus region.
In Lazique, that comes up a lot. Why was Lazique so important to him? Procopius seems to emphasize its strategic value.
He does, listing several reasons that reveal Persian long-term thinking. First, controlling Lazique was key to holding Iberia securely.
Iberia, that's modern Georgia, roughly.
Roughly, yes. The most notable men in Iberia, including their king Gorgianes, had previously revolted against Persia, and since then, the Persians didn't allow them to have their own king, creating deep suspicion and dissatisfaction. By controlling neighboring Lazique, which bordered Iberia, they could prevent the Iberians from having anyone to turn to for support if they rebelled against Persian rule.
So controlling Lazique was a way to keep a lid on potential rebellion and arrest of client kingdom. Makes sense.
Right. Second, Lazique was a bulwark against the barbarians living in the Caucasus, specifically the Huns. By controlling Lazique, the Persians could prevent the Huns from plundering their own empire and, crucially, send them against the Roman Empire more easily.
Turning a defensive barrier into an offensive launchpad, that's smart.
Precisely. But the biggest advantage Chosroes hoped to gain from Lazique was far more ambitious, a strategic vision aimed at the very heart of the Eastern Roman Empire.
Oh, what was that?
Procopius says he planned to use it as a base to overrun the lands along the Black Sea, places like Cappadocia, Galatia, and Bithynia, potentially even capturing Byzantium itself by sudden assault, with no one opposing them.
Wow, a Black Sea invasion route straight to the capital. That is thinking big and underscores the strategic stakes of controlling this seemingly remote region.
He really does.
And this brings us to another chilling story that exemplifies Chosroes' ruthless and deceptive nature, his plot against Adurgandad, the Conarang appointed by his father, Kavad.
The very same Adurgandad from the Promise story.
The very same, the man who had done so much for the Sasanian kingdom.
Yes, Adurgandad, the very man who had secured Kavad's position and subjected 12 barbarian nations for him, was viewed by Chosroes not with gratitude, but suspicion and simmering resentment. A key insight here is how personal secrets and past humiliations could drive political action at the highest levels.
What secrets about Kavad?
The secret of Kavad's past, particularly his time in exile, and perhaps that detail about the marriage, was known to Adurgandad and, crucially, to his son Bahram, who had shared it with Chosroes.
And Chosroes was furious that he had suffered such things at the hands of his slave, as Procopius puts it, seeing Adurgandad as an agent of his father's past that threatened his own power.
Exactly. Seeing no other way to get the renowned, invincible general in his power, Chosroes devised a cunning plan masked as a great honor.
Okay, what was the plan?
He feigned a grand double invasion of Roman territory on both sides of the Euphrates and announced he would grant Adurgandad equal honor with the king by putting him in command of one of the divisions. He ordered Adurgandad to meet him quickly as he returned from Colchis to receive instructions.
That sounds like a great honor, a position of supreme command.
It was presented as such, and Adurgandad was overjoyed and immediately set out. But being an old man, he couldn't endure the toil of the journey, fell off his horse, and broke his leg.
Oh no! So he couldn't take command.
When Chosroes arrived and saw him, he feigned sympathy, saying Adurgandad couldn't march with them in that state and should go to a fortress for treatment.
A fortress? where he could be easily isolated and dealt with, far from his troops and power base. I see where this is going.
Precisely. Procopius says Chosroes sent the man away on the road to death, secretly sending men behind him to kill a Jurgendad in the fortress.
Just brutal. And what happened to Bahram, the son who revealed the secret?
Bahram then received the Kenarang office.
Yeah.
It's a stark illustration of Chosroes' cruelty, paranoia, and willingness to eliminate anyone, no matter how loyal or capable, who posed a perceived threat or held potentially damaging knowledge. It's a key insight into the brutal nature of power politics in the Sasanian court.
Just brutal efficiency masked as compassion. While we're on the Eastern Front, Procopius throws in some other interesting details and characters that flesh out the picture beyond the major kings and generals.
There are indeed figures like Ioannis Gous, an Armenian commander in Roman service who fought on foot, famously killed in Allen in battle and won over the Aptilio people, showing the diverse origins and skills within the Roman army.
Right, it wasn't just Romans fighting.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Or Ioannis the Eater, a guardsman sent to Assyria, who later shows up in Italy, suggesting the movement of individuals across these vast theaters of war.
And you mentioned the Persian law about mutilated men and kingship earlier.
Yes, it's a detail Procopius brings up elsewhere, forbidding anyone who is physically mutilated from being king. It adds another layer to Kavad's blinding of Balazs. It wasn't just punishment, it was a specific, legally recognized way of making him politically ineligible to rule ever again, an insight into Persian legal customs.
Interesting.
We also hear about Simeon, the manager of a Persian gold mine, who defected to the Romans and was granted Armenian villages, only to be murdered later by sons of Perros, a detail illustrating the ongoing cycles of violence and revenge.
And Procopius described the landscape, too.
Procopius also describes the geography of Perso-Armenia, noting features like the Tauros Range and the Arsenos River, helping to set the scene for the battles in that region.
It paints a vivid picture of the people and places involved, not just the major kings and battles. Okay, that's a deep dive into the Eastern Front. Now let's swing halfway across the known world to the west, specifically North Africa, and the Vandal Kingdom, a story of lost Roman territory and ambitious reclamation.
To understand Justinian's war against the Vandals, we need to briefly touch upon the state of the Western Roman Empire leading up to its conventional fall. We have figures like Augustulus, called by the diminutive because he was a child.
The Augustus.
Right, exactly, with his father Orestes effectively ruling for him.
And the Romans had brought in various barbarian groups, Siri, Alans, and other Goths as allies, which turned out to be a double-edged sword. A key insight here is how the dependency on barbarian mercenaries eventually undermined the Western Empire's stability.
It certainly did. These allies, feeling their strength, became increasingly tyrannical. They demanded a third of the land in Italy.
A third. That's a huge demand.
It was. When Orestes refused this demand, Odoacer, a man from among them, killed him. Odoacer then agreed to carry out the land distribution, thus gaining the allegiance of these barbarian groups, and held tyranny over Italy for 10 years.
And he let Augustulus live.
Notably, without harming Augustulus further, allowing him to live as a private citizen.
A relatively peaceful end for the last Western Roman emperor, but a clear sign of the shift in power. But our focus in Africa is the Vandals. How did they end up establishing a powerful kingdom there?
The Vandals, originally from elsewhere, had settled in Spain. According to Procopius, their migration to Africa in the early 5th century was initiated by a Roman figure, Bonifacius, who was the Count of Africa.
A Roman invited them. Why?
He was in conflict with the Roman authorities in Italy and, feeling threatened, sought an alliance with the Vandals, specifically the sons of their leader Gothic, the legitimate son Gontharis, and the illegitimate but clever and skilled Gaiseric.
So Bonifacius invited them across the Strait of Cadiz, agreeing to share Libya with them. That seems like an incredibly risky move, an example of short-sighted internal Roman conflict having massive external consequences.
It proved to be disastrous for Roman control of Africa. The Vandals crossed, defeated Bonifacius, and besieged him in the city of Hippo Regius,
where Augustine died during the siege, famously.
That's right. Procopius notes conflicting accounts of Gontharis's fate. Some say Gaiseric killed him, others that he died in battle in Spain before the crossing. But Gaiseric certainly emerged as the sole, highly capable leader.
And they took over.
The Vandals defeated a second Roman army sent against them and eventually gained full possession of Libya, establishing a powerful pirate kingdom that controlled a vital grain supply from Africa.
And they didn't just stay in Africa. Under Gaiseric, they famously sacked Rome in 455 AD.
Yes, Procopius mentions their sack of Rome under Gaiseric, detailing how they accumulated immense wealth in Africa. He also notes that while they absorbed various peoples into their kingdom, they did not fully absorb the native Moors.
Ah, the Moors. They become important later.
Leaving them as a potentially destabilizing factor, which would become significant later.
Flash forward to Justinian's reign in the 6th century. The Eastern Roman Empire, no longer content with just the East, decides to try and reclaim Africa as part of Justinian's ambitious restoration policy. Emperor Leon, Justinian's predecessor, had already sent a truly massive expedition against the Vandals.
Procopius describes it as a fleet such as the Romans were said never to have had before, numbering over 1,000 ships. Gaiseric was reportedly awestruck by its scale and might have surrendered immediately.
But he didn't.
Had the Roman general, Basiliscus, not hesitated.
And that hesitation was attributed to either cowardice or treachery by Procopius. That's a strong accusation.
That's Procopius' assessment, suggesting Basiliscus might have been influenced by Aspar, a powerful Gothic general in Roman service, or had taken a great amount of gold from Gaiseric. Whatever the reason, he granted Gaiseric a 5-day armistice.
A fatal mistake.
This moment of Roman indecision and potential corruption is a key insight into the weaknesses that sometimes plague the imperial system, even with overwhelming force.
And Gaiseric, being cunning, used that time to devastating advantage.
Absolutely. He waited for a favorable wind, then sent empty, fast ships towed towards the Roman fleet. He set these ships on fire and sent them drifting into the crowded Roman anchorage off Cape Bon.
Fire ships, classic tactic.
With so many ships packed together, the fire spread easily, causing immense confusion and destruction. Procopius paints a chaotic scene of shouting, the roar of flames, and ships colliding as Romans tried to push the fire ships away or escape. Meanwhile, the Vandal warships arrived and began ramming and sinking the disordered Roman vessels.
Wow, utter chaos.
It was a brilliant, devastating tactic, a key insight into Vandal naval cunning and their ability to exploit an enemy's weakness.
A disaster for the Roman fleet. Despite the overall failure, there was an act of striking bravery by a Roman commander during this chaos, a moment of individual defiance against the disaster.
Yes, Ioannis, the deputy general under Basiliscus. Procopius explicitly states that Ioannis had no share whatever in his treason.
Good for him. What did he do?
Surrounded by enemies, his ship burning, he fought fiercely, killing many Vandals. When his ship was about to be captured, he chose death over capture, leaping into the sea with his full arms and equipment.
Whoa!
He refused Gaiseric's son, Gento's offer of surrender and safety, famously saying only that Ioannis would never fall into the hands of dogs.
Never fall into the hands of dogs. Powerful.
A stark, powerful moment of defiance that Procopius clearly admired, highlighting the Roman ideal of honorable death in contrast to the general's failure.
What a dramatic end to that expedition. After this massive failure under Emperor Leon, the Vandal kingdom in Africa continued under Gaiseric's successors, but it wasn't a period of stability.
Far from it. After Gaiseric, his son Huneric ruled, followed by Gunthamund and then Thrasimund, who ruled for 27 years and was defeated by the Moors, indicating the persistent internal challenges.
See the Moors again.
Then came Hilderic, the son of Huneric. Procopius describes Hilderic as gentle, easily approached, harsh to no one, but soft in war. His able nephew, Homer, whom Procopius calls the Achilles of the Vandals, led the armies, which was apparently a source of Vandal discontent.
They didn't like having a general who wasn't the king?
Correct.
Or they didn't like Hilderic being soft?
Probably a bit of both.
Yeah.
And it was under Hilderic that the Vandals were defeated again by the Moors under Antallus. This military weakness seems significant.
Yeah, definitely.
Correct. This also created friction with Theoderic's Goths in Italy, as Hilderic imprisoned and killed Goths, including Theoderic's sister Amalafrida, who was married to Thrasimund. However, Theodoric was unable to retaliate across the sea.
But Hilderic had a connection to Justinian.
Crucially, yes. Hilderic was a close friend and ally of Justinian, who at this point wasn't yet emperor, but was effectively governing affairs under his aging uncle Justin. They exchanged large gifts of money, laying the groundwork for later intervention.
This friendship with Justinian becomes central when Gelimer, a nephew of Gaiseric, stages a coup, overthrowing Hilderic.
Gelimer usurped the throne, consolidating his power through brutal acts. He blinded Hilderic's formidable general nephew Homer and imprisoned Hilderic and another notable, Euages.
Blinding Homer, the Achilles of the Vandals. That's taking out your main military threat.
Exactly. This act of violence against Justinian's friend provided Justinian with the casus belli, the official reason for war, which he eagerly seized upon as part of his plan to restore the Western Empire.
So Justinian didn't just invade, he framed it as defending his friend.
Justinian, despite his friendship with Hilderic, initially sent envoys and demanding letters, cleverly framing his intentions not to challenge Gelimer's rule itself, but demanding the release of Hilderic and the blinded Homer.
And Justinian's message, as recorded by Procopius, makes his intentions clear. We come not to make war upon him who has succeeded to his kingdom, but as his avengers for the wrong done to Hilderic.
Right. He also stated the old treaty with Gaiseric, made with the Western Roman Empire, wouldn't stand in his way, arguing he was simply restoring what was rightfully Roman.
How did Gelimer respond to that?
Gelimer's response was defiant and dismissive. He sent the envoys away and kept Hilderic and Homer in even closer confinement, accusing them of plotting escape to Byzantium.
Not a smart move, antagonizing Justinian like that.
And he also unwisely dispersed his forces, sending his brother Tasso with a large force to Sardinia to deal with a tyrant named Goda, who had seized control there. Tasso was successful in overthrowing and killing Goda, but his absence from Africa weakened Gelimer at a critical moment.
So, with diplomatic means exhausted and Gelimer showing no sign of yielding, Justinian launched the invasion, entrusting it to Belisarius fresh from his command in the east.
Belisarius was sent with a significant force, numbering around 4,000 regulars and foederati.
Foederati, those are the allied troops, right?
Yeah, often barbarian allies fighting under Roman command for pay, plus 3,000 Isaurians' tough mountain troops from Asia Minor, plus Huns and Moors, alongside notable commanders like Constantinos, Besses, and Peranios.
Quite a mixed force. Where were they supposedly heading?
Their stated destination was Carthage, but Justinian gave Belisarius secret instructions to attempt Sicily first as a secure base. If that went smoothly, they were to secure it. If not, they were to proceed directly to Libya. This strategic deception is a key insight into how major expeditions were planned.
Always have a plan B, or at least a feint. Belisarius' campaign against Gelimer was remarkably swift and successful, especially compared to the previous Roman attempts.
It was. He landed, marched towards Carthage, defeated Gelimer at the Battle of Decimum outside the city walls by expertly using topography to his advantage, entered Carthage, and later defeated Gelimer decisively in the Battle of Tricamarum.
And Gelimer.
Gelimer eventually fled and took refuge in a remote mountain stronghold, but was eventually captured after a long and miserable wait.
And Belisarius returned to Byzantium, bringing Gelimer and the Vandals with him, and was granted a remarkable honor that hadn't been seen in centuries.
Yes. Procopius describes Belisarius receiving honors traditionally reserved for the greatest victorious generals. Honors, he notes, that had not been attained by anyone other than emperors in about 600 years, apart from figures like Titus and Trajan.
A triumph, like the old Roman Republic.
Belisarius conducted what the Romans call a triumph, though not in the ancient manner on foot from his house, but from his house to the hippodrome, and then within the hippodrome itself, a sign of evolving customs, even for this ancient ceremony.
And the spoils displayed were spectacular, offering a tangible link to the history of conquest.
Procopius gives a detailed list. Thrones of gold, carriages for the empress, precious stones, golden drinking cups, items for the imperial table, thousands of talents of silver, and the entire royal treasure that Gaiseric had taken from the palace in Rome during the sack a century earlier.
Wow, the actual treasure from the sack of Rome.
That's what Procopius says. And among these, Procopius specifically notes, were the treasures of the Jews, which Titus, son of Vespasian, had brought to Rome after the capture of Jerusalem centuries before that.
That's a fascinating and poignant detail, showing how these treasures, originally from Jerusalem, traveled across empires, ending up in Rome, then seized by the Vandals in Africa, and now finally displayed in triumph in Byzantium. It's a powerful illustration of the long history of conquest and the movement of wealth and sacred objects.
Absolutely incredible connection.
So Africa was reclaimed, but the sources indicate challenges remain, particularly from the native Moors.
Indeed. Procopius notes that while most Moorish groups initially sought alliance with the Romans after the Vandal defeat, their fidelity was always doubtful. The Vandals had never fully subdued them, and now the Romans inherited that problem.
So more fighting.
There were numerous conflicts and insurrections. We hear of Moors rising in Byzantium and Numidia, ambushing and annihilating a Roman force, and an exchange of letters between the Roman commander Solomon and the Moors, detailing warnings and defiant replies. It wasn't a simple matter of victory and peace. Roman control remained precarious.
It wasn't a simple matter of victory and peace. The land remained troubled, illustrating that military conquest is often just the first step.
Exactly. Procopius states that because of these wars and insurrections, the land was left, for the most part, destitute of human habitation. A grim picture of the cost of conflict.
Destitute of human habitation sounds devastating.
While Roman commanders like Ioannes later achieved significant successes, securing the alliance of figures like Cucinus and defeating Antyllus and Iodes, the recovery was slow and difficult.
And on top of external threats, the Roman forces in Africa also faced serious internal strife.
A serious Roman mutiny occurred in Carthage, triggered by discontent over pay and conditions. Procopius describes soldiers gathering in the hippodrome, unhappy with conditions, insulting Solomon and other commanders.
Let's set it off.
They kill Theodorus, the commander of the guards, described as an excellent warrior, in an outburst of violence. This act of bloodshed led to widespread plundering and drunkenness in the city.
And Procopius himself was caught up in this dramatic moment.
Yes, he was. Solomon managed to escape unnoticed to a sanctuary in the palace, where he was joined by Martinos. They later escaped the city by boat under the cover of darkness, and Procopius, who wrote this history, was with them, along with about 5 men from Solomon's household.
The historian escaping by boat in the middle of a mutiny.
It's incredible that the historian whose work we're reading was personally involved in these events. Solomon then sent Martinos to Numidia to rally loyal soldiers, wrote to Theodorus the Cappadocian, who helped them escape but was suspected of plotting to govern Carthage.
The guy who helped them escape was suspected of plotting. Intrigue everywhere.
Seems like it. And Solomon himself went to Belisarius in Syracuse, who was just completing the conquest of Sicily, to report the disastrous situation and beg him to return to Africa to restore order.
It's incredible that the historian himself was part of the dramatic escape, adding a layer of immediacy and personal perspective to the events he describes. That level of personal detail really brings the history to life. Now let's move on to the third major front of Justinian's wars. Italy against the Goths, a campaign that proved far longer and more challenging than the conquest of Africa.
As we mentioned briefly, Italy in the west had fallen under the tyranny of Odoacer after the deposition of Augustulus in 476 AD. Odoacer ruled for 10 years by distributing land to the barbarian allies who had put him in power.
But Odoacer was eventually overthrown by Theodoric, the king of the Ostrogoths, sent by the Eastern Roman Emperor Zeno, who established his own kingdom in Italy, ruling relatively successfully for decades.
Yeah, Theodoric's reign is often seen as a period of relative stability.
After Theodoric's death in 526 AD, the situation became unstable, setting the stage for Roman intervention.
The kingdom passed to Theodoric's 8-year-old grandson, Athalaric, with his mother, Amalasuntha, acting as regent. Procopius paints a picture of Amalasuntha as a woman of great wisdom and justice, with a masculine temper.
A masculine temper? What does Procopius mean by that? Strong-willed.
Strong-willed, decisive, not afraid to exert authority, I think. A key insight into her rule is her approach to the Romans in Italy. She was notably lenient and just towards them, inflicting no bodily punishment or fines and restoring estates to the children of figures like Symmachus and Boethius, who had suffered under Theodoric.
So she was clearly trying to bridge the gap between the ruling Goths and the Roman population, essential for long-term stability, and part of that involved her son's education.
Exactly. Amalasuntha wanted Athalaric educated like the Romans, even hiring a grammarian and appointing prudent Goth tutors, seeing Roman education as beneficial for governance.
But the Gothic nobles weren't keen on that.
But the Gothic nobles were deeply unhappy with this, reflecting a fundamental cultural divide. Procopius says they had a mad desire to wrong their subjects, meaning the Romans, and wanted their king to be raised in a more barbarian fashion, rooted in Gothic traditions and military values.
They saw Roman education as making him weak, unmanly.
Precisely. Their arguments, as recorded by Procopius, are quite pointed and offer a key insight into the Gothic perspective and their anxieties about assimilation. They claimed letters are far removed from manliness, and that teaching from old men resulted in a cowardly and submissive spirit.
Wow, quite the anti-intellectual stance there.
They advocated training in arms, so he would learn to despise swords and spears, seeing military prowess as the true mark of a ruler. They even cited Theodoric himself, who was illiterate but conquered Italy, as proof that Roman learning was unnecessary for leadership.
So what did they want?
They demanded that Amalasuntha dismiss the tutors and give Athalaric boys his own age as companions, allowing him to grow up in a more traditional Gothic environment.
There was even an incident where Amalasuntha, frustrated with Athalaric's behavior influenced by these companions, struck him, leading to outrage among the Goths, who accused her of wanting to get rid of him to remarry and rule herself.
That incident fueled the nobles' demands and puts Amalasuntha in an increasingly difficult position. She understood the precariousness of her situation as a female ruler, promoting policies unpopular with her own people.
So she looked for outside help.
She began trying to secure her position by courting Justinian's friendship and protection. Procopius states that she eventually planned to hand over Italy to Justinian, seeing alliance with the Eastern Empire as her only viable path to survival and retaining some influence.
Hand over Italy. That's a huge step. But before she could fully implement that plan, she was betrayed by a relative she had empowered, Theodahad, setting in motion the chain of events that led to war.
Theodahad, who was related to Amalasuntha, was given supreme power by her, perhaps as a means to manage the Gothic nobles or assist in her plans. However, he acted completely contrary to her hopes and promises.
How so?
He allied himself with the relatives of Goths Amalasuntha had executed for plotting against her. And, before her envoys even reached Byzantium to finalize her plans with Justinian, he suddenly imprisoned her on an island in Lake Bolsena in Tuscany.
Imprisoned his own relative who empowered him, ruthless, and he tried to cover his tracks with Justinian, hoping to legitimize his usurpation.
Yes, he sent Roman senators like Liberius and Opilio to Byzantium to excuse his actions, assuring Justinian that Amalasuntha was unharmed, while at the same time forcing Amalasuntha herself to write a letter claiming the same, and falsely adding that she had previously perpetrated irreparable outrages upon him.
Did Justinian buy it?
It was a transparent attempt to mislead Justinian, but Justinian's envoy, a man named Petros, was already on his way to Italy on a secret mission from Justinian related to Amalasuntha's initial overtures.
Ah, the timing. So Petros walked right into this mess.
Petros's mission was complex. Secretly negotiate with Theodahad about ceding Tuscany to the Romans, secretly arrange with Amalasuntha about handing over all Italy, and openly negotiate about Lilybaeum, a strategic point in Sicily that Justinian wanted.
So Justinian didn't know about the coup when Petros left.
Justinian hadn't yet heard about Athalaric's death. He died of illness. Theodahad's accession, or Amalasuntha's fate, when Petros set out. Petros learned about the situation piece by piece, first meeting Amalasuntha's initial envoys who told him Theodahad was king, and then meeting Theodahad's delegation with Liberius and Opilio, who informed him of Amalasuntha's imprisonment.
And it was upon hearing of Amalasuntha's fate, Theodahad had her murdered soon after imprisoning her, combined with Belisarius' victory in Africa, that Justinian had the clear cause and the means to launch the Gothic War.
Yes, Procopius dates the start of the war to the 9th year of Justinian's reign. The Roman campaign began simultaneously in two areas. Mundo was sent to take Salona in Dalmatia, a region subject to the Goths.
Dalmatia, modern Croatia mostly.
Right. While Belisarius was sent by ship towards Italy, again with the feigned destination of Carthage, but orders to attempt Sicily first, using it as a stepping stone for Italy.
The Roman forces saw early success, particularly in Dalmatia and Sicily.
In Dalmatia, Constantinos, through cunning use of spies, seized a narrow pass near Salona with 500 men, entered the city, repaired fortifications, and forced the Gothic commander Grippa to retreat to Ravenna. The Romans gained control of Dalmatia and Liburnia relatively quickly.
And Sicily.
Meanwhile, Belisarius easily secured Sicily, which served as his vital springboard for the invasion of mainland Italy.
And his next target was Naples, which proved a tougher nut to crack than Sicily.
It did. Belisarius besieged Naples, a well-defended city. Despite tearful negotiations with the Neapolitans, reported by a figure named Stephanus who conveyed Belisarius's pleas, the city leaders refused to yield to the Romans, fearing Gothic retribution.
So how did Belisarius get in?
Belisarius resorted to a remarkable piece of ingenuity to enter the city when traditional siege methods failed.
The aqueduct, a classic tale of using unexpected means to overcome defenses.
The aqueduct. He discovered an unused section, cut into it, and selected 400 picked men under Magnus and Ennis to enter the city at night through the narrow dark channel, using lanterns and trumpeters to signal their progress and entry.
400 men through an aqueduct. That must have been terrifying.
It was a high-risk plan requiring great courage. Procopius notes that over half the soldiers initially turned back, terrified by the danger and claustrophobia, but were shamed into returning by the general's railings and the eagerness of men like Photios, Belisarius' young stepson, to lead the way.
Belisarius' stepson wanted to go.
Yes, Photios was eager. Belisarius also took the precaution of placing a guard near the tower nearest the aqueduct opening to prevent detection. It's a key insight into Belisarius' adaptable strategic thinking and the bravery and occasional fear of the soldiers.
A covert operation straight out of fiction. After taking Naples, Belisarius marched on Rome. The Gothic king Theodahad proved ineffective and was soon replaced by Vitiges, a seasoned military leader.
Right, Theodahad didn't last long once the fighting started.
The Roman garrison already in Rome panicked at the approach of Vitiges' large Gothic army.
Yes, the Roman garrison in Rome, seeing the vast numbers of Goths under Vitiges approaching, simply fled the bridge tower they were guarding and stole off towards Campania, fearing punishment or shame more than the enemy. Vitiges then prepared for the siege of Rome.
And Procopius was there.
Procopius himself being present in the city during the early part of the siege.
And Procopius gives us fascinating, detailed descriptions of the Gothic siege engines, providing a technical insight into warfare of the period.
He does. He describes wooden towers built equal in height to the city walls, measured precisely by counting the stone courses, mounted on wheels and drawn by oxen.
The siege towers. Okay, what else?
He also describes the rams, large structures on wheels, covered with hides for protection, with a heavy iron-headed beam hanging inside that could be swung with great force against the walls by over 50 men inside, explaining how the engine gets its name from the way the beam butts against the wall like male sheep.
Like a battering ram, literally.
Exactly. They also prepared a large number of ladders for scaling the walls. It's a detailed look at the technology and effort required for siege warfare.
Despite these elaborate preparations and the sheer numbers of the Gothic army, Belisarius held Rome against Vitiges' lengthy siege.
He did, famously organizing the defense of the city and telling envoys who reported his unwillingness to leave the city that the Goths were hoping for unlikely things if they thought they could frighten him out of Rome.
So Vitiges eventually gave up on Rome.
Vitiges eventually broke off the siege after over a year, having failed to take the city, but he didn't give up on Italy. He garrisoned numerous fortified places across the peninsula, including key cities like Chiusi, Orvieto, Todi, Petra in Picenum, Osimo, the largest city in Picenum, Urbino, Cesena, and Monteferretra.
A whole network of strongholds.
Forcing the Romans to undertake a slow, difficult process of reducing these strongholds.
Belisarius was eventually recalled from Italy, partly due to slanders against him, charging him with attempting to usurp the throne.
Politics back in Constantinople interfering again.
And partly due to the renewed need for his leadership to fight the Persians and other threats in the east. Other commanders were left in charge in Italy, and this created an opportunity for a new Gothic leader to rise to prominence. Totila.
Totila emerged after the Goths had suffered setbacks and internal leadership struggles following Vitiges' capture and removal to Byzantium. He proved to be a dynamic and effective leader, reorganizing the Gothic forces and eventually recapturing Rome itself from the Roman garrison.
He took Rome back.
Procopius recounts his capture of the city via the Asinaria Gate at night.
How did he manage that? Through treachery, like the aqueduct entry in Naples.
It was indeed treachery, aided by disaffected Roman soldiers, highlighting the fragility of loyalties. 4 brave Goths climbed the ropes with Isaurians who were supposed to be guarding that section of the wall.
The guards helped them.
Apparently so. Once inside, they axed open the wooden beam and ironwork of the Asinaria Gate, allowing Totila and his army to enter.
And what was Totila's first command upon entering the city, knowing Roman soldiers were still inside?
He ordered his men to keep together and not scatter immediately, fearing ambushes despite the natural tumult and confusion of entering a city at night, demonstrating a focus on discipline even in the moment of victory.
Smart move. Did the Romans fight back?
He was informed that most of the Roman soldiers and commanders, including Bessus and some patricians, were fleeing through another gate.
And Totila's reaction to the news of the enemy fleeing was unexpected, almost chillingly pragmatic.
Procopius records his response. For what could be sweeter for a man than a fleeing enemy? He did not permit pursuit, content to let the demoralized Romans escape, rather than risking his own troops in a potentially costly chase through the city streets at night.
Just let them go. Secure the prize.
It's a key insight into his calculated approach to warfare, prioritizing securing the city over annihilating the routed enemy.
Once he had the city, he gathered the Roman senators who remained and gave them a rather blistering speech, recorded by Procopius, which serves as a key insight into Gothic grievances against Rome and Justinian.
Oh yes, he reproached them fiercely for their ingratitude. He reminded them of the benefits they had received from Theodoric and Athalaric high offices, wealth, peaceful rule, and accused them of betraying the Goths by inviting the Romans, the Graci, as he calls them, into Italy.
The Greeks, right. He's blaming the senators for the invasion.
Exactly. And he contrasted this with what Justinian had supposedly done for them since their return.
What did he claim Justinian had done?
He forced them to admit that Justinian had stripped them of offices, subjected them to maltreatment by the Logothetai, financial officials, who forced them to settle accounts, and made them pay taxes during wartime, leaving them impoverished and powerless. He called them household slaves.
Oh, that's harsh.
To drive the point home, he brought forward Herodianos and the Isaurians who had handed over the city, contrasting their loyalty to him with the senators' failure to surrender even an empty town, and promised that these traitors would now hold the senators' offices.
He was going to give the senators' jobs to the guys who betrayed the city.
A shocking threat to the Roman aristocracy.
Though Procopius notes that Pelagius, one of the senators, pleaded with Totila for the unfortunate men who had taken refuge in sanctuaries and secured a promise that he would treat them kindly, showing a small moment of mercy in a harsh takeover.
A brief flicker of compassion. Totila later had to address his own Goth troops after they suffered setbacks. A speech also recorded by Procopius, which gives a fascinating insight into his strategic thinking and the challenges of leadership when facing adversity.
He argued against their anger towards him, attributing the failures partly to human nature and chance, but also contrasting his strategy with that of his predecessor, Vitiges.
He argued that Vitiges' mistake was not destroying the walls of coastal towns like Fano and Pesaro, but leaving Rome and other cities intact. The trouble, he claimed, came precisely from these fortified places, which the Romans could use as strongholds.
So Totila's strategy was, what? Knock down the walls?
Therefore, his strategy was to pull down the walls of captured towns, like Benevento, so the enemy couldn't use them as fortresses and would be forced to fight in the open field, where the Goths, especially their cavalry, might have an advantage.
He points out that the Goths had praised this strategy when he implemented it earlier.
Yes, he says they marveled at his good judgment then. He contrasts this with their current change of heart after recent defeats, simply because Belisarius, who had returned to Italy for a second, less successful command, had unexpectedly accomplished the object for which he strove, through unreasonable daring.
So he's blaming Belisarius' recklessness for the recent problems.
He suggests his Goths were more astounded by daring than by foresight, even though foresight is taught by experience. It's a key insight into a leader trying to maintain morale and justify his tactical choices in hindsight, arguing for the long-term wisdom of his destructive strategy.
The war in Italy dragged on for many more years after Belisarius' final recall, with various incidents illustrating the chaos and breakdown of order.
Yeah, it's a real slog.
We hear of Roman soldiers in Rome killing their commander Cannon over grain trafficking and threatening to defect to Totila unless Justinian granted them amnesty and back pay.
Wow, killing their own commander over food? Things must have been desperate.
Which Justinian eventually did, showing the emperor's pragmatic response to a dangerous situation.
We also hear of the slanders against Belisarius, charging him with usurpation, revealing the political infighting at Justinian's court that hampered the war effort.
Right, the court politics again.
And the actions of Gothic commanders like Indulf, a former bodyguard of Belisarius who defected to Totila, who led devastating raids on Dalmatia and Laurento, illustrating the shifting loyalties and brutal nature of the conflict.
A former bodyguard of Belisarius' defects. That says a lot. And finally, after years of campaigning and several changes in Roman command, Totila's reign came to an end under the forces led by the eunuch general Narses.
The end of Totila is recounted in Procopius' final book. After suffering a decisive defeat in battle against Narses, Totila fled at night with a few men, pursued by Romans who didn't initially know who he was in the darkness.
There's a critical, almost cinematic moment in the pursuit involving a Gepid soldier and a Gothic youth that seals his fate.
Yes. Asbedos, a Gepid serving the Romans, charged Totila in the dark, intending to strike him with his spear. A Gothic youth from Totila's household, recognizing his master even at night, cried out, "What's this, you dog? Are you rushing to strike your own master?"
Did that stop him?
Asbedos still thrust his spear, wounding Totila mortally, but was himself wounded by Scipio, one of Totila's escorts. Scipio was also wounded by a pursuer. The other pursuer stopped to aid Asbedos, while Totila's escort, thinking they were still pursued, rode on with the dying king.
It's a dramatic detail highlighting the loyalty of his bodyguard even in flight and the accidental nature of his death. They rode a significant distance before stopping, only to realize the king was dying.
They rode 84 stades, a considerable distance, roughly 10 miles to a place called Capre, where they finally rested and treated Totila's wound. But it was mortal, and he died there.
And they buried him.
His followers buried him quickly and departed. Procopius notes that Totila had ruled for 11 years.
And Procopius offers a deeply philosophical reflection on Totila's death, especially considering his previous successes, which serves as a key insight into Procopius's own worldview as a historian.
He does. He writes that Totila's end was not worthy of his past achievements, attributing it not just to Narses' skill but to fortune, obviously showing off and tearing human affairs to shreds just to make a display of your own perverse nature and unaccountable will.
He blames fortune, like bad luck.
Pretty much. He suggests fortune had granted Totila prosperity for no particular reason and then struck him down with cowardice and destruction for no fitting cause. Procopius finds these workings of fortune to have never been comprehensible to man, nor will they ever be so, though people offer explanations for their own ignorance.
It's a striking moment of the historian grappling with the unpredictable nature of historical events and individual fates, a reminder that even carefully planned strategies can be overturned by chance.
A very philosophical ending from Procopius.
That's a powerful way to end Totila's story and reflect on the larger forces Procopius saw at play. We've covered the major campaigns, but the sources provide us with fascinating details beyond the battlefield and royal courts, offering glimpses into other aspects of life and the world in the 6th century.
Absolutely. There's the chilling description of the plague that struck the empire in the spring of 542, part of the devastating Justinianic plague that swept the Mediterranean world.
The plague of Justinian, right? Procopius witnessed that too.
Procopius provides one of the key contemporary accounts. It sounds horrific, a major disruption to the empire, even amidst the wars.
What kind of details does he give?
It was. Procopius describes the exhaustion of caregivers, noting they didn't contract the disease simply through proximity, which puzzled contemporaries. He details the terrifying symptoms: patients falling out of bed, wanting to rush out of houses or throw themselves into water.
Throw themselves into water? Why?
Not from thirst, but a form of mental illness, he suggests, and difficulty eating.
And the physical suffering sounds intense for those who weren't delirious.
Yes. He mentions the pain from the mortification of the buboes, painful swellings, for those not delirious or comatose, while others were so beside themselves that they couldn't even sense the pain.
The buboes, like the Black Death later.
Similar symptoms, yes. Physicians, he notes, were at a loss, investigating bodies by cutting into the buboes and finding a malignant carbuncle inside.
Right.
It highlights the vulnerability of the aged to disease and the limits of medical knowledge.
Beyond natural disasters like the plague, there were also plots and the complex politics of the various barbarian groups interacting with the empire, details that show the constant undercurrent of instability.
We hear about a plot against Justinian himself, involving figures like Arsaces, Artabanes, and Chanoranges, revealing discontent even at the highest levels of the imperial court.
A plot against Justinian. Who did they try to involve?
Arsaces attempted to bring in Germanos, Justinian's well-respected relative and capable general, and his sons, specifically approaching the energetic young Iosinos, who still had his first beard and had recently been consul, suggesting they sought a figure with imperial connections and military legitimacy.
Arsaces met Iosdinos in a sanctuary and tried to persuade him to join their plot.
Yes, making Iosdinos swear secrecy only to his father. Arsaces appealed to Iosdinos' sense of injustice, pointing out that despite being close relatives to the emperor and virtuous themselves, he and Germanos were kept in a private station, while common and vulgar people held offices they weren't entitled to.
Playing on resentment. Did it work?
He noted Iosdinos hadn't even been allowed to inherit his uncle Borades' property, and suggested they would be further snubbed with Belisarius' return from Italy, framing the plot as a necessary step to secure their rightful place and protect themselves.
But Iosdinos was shocked and refused, reporting it to his father.
He was, telling Arsaces neither he nor his father could ever contemplate such actions. It shows the political currents and discontent swirling beneath the surface of Justinian's court, driven by ambition and perceived slights, a key insight into the internal pressures the emperor faced.
And the empire was dealing with lots of different groups, right? Like the Lombards and Gepids?
We also see the complex relationships with other barbarian groups, like the embassy from the Lombards to Justinian arguing against the Gepids.
The Lombards had some pointed accusations against the Gepids, framed to appeal to Roman interests, didn't they?
They did, highlighting how barbarian groups strategically sought Roman alliances by emphasizing their rivals' transgressions against the empire. They accused the Gepids of only being quiet due to impotence, not conviction, arguing that opportunity alone reveals the nature of a man.
What specific things did they accuse the Gepids of?
They charged the Gepids with trespassing on Roman land, holding Sirmium, a key strategic city, enslaving Romans, and boasting possession of Dacia, all while receiving Roman pay. They highlighted the shamelessness of the Gepids' embassy to Byzantium given these actions.
And the Lombards even brought a religious element into their appeal, trying to sway Justinian by highlighting religious differences.
They did, arguing that the Romans should side with them because they had agreed with you about God from the start, meaning they were Orthodox Christians while the Gepids were Arians, a different branch of Christianity.
So they used religion as a political tool.
It shows how religious differences played a significant role in alliances and conflicts in this era, a key insight into the intersection of faith and politics. We also hear of figures like Hildigisel, discontent with his rank, and Gore, a captive Goth who incited Hildigisel's flight and rebellion.
More defections and rebellions.
They escaped with Lombards, stole horses from imperial pastures, defeated Kutriger Huns, and famously caught and killed Roman commanders drinking by a river in Illyria at night by surprise. A raw, brutal moment that illustrates the unpredictable violence on the empire's borders.
Finally, the sources give us some incredibly rich descriptions of geography and enduring structures that Procopius encountered, showing his broader interest beyond just military history.
Procopius provides details on the geography of Lazic, the strategic region we discussed earlier, including the Black Sea coast, the interior nations, Skimnia, Suwania, Meshroi, subject to the Livoi kings, the fertile mountains of the Meshroi known for vineyards, and the Phesis River descending from the Caucasus.
The river boundary between Europe and Asia, some thought.
Which some considered the boundary between Asia, left descending, and Europe. Right. He notes that most Lizoi habitations are on the European side, with only the city of Petra on the Asian side, a geographic detail important for understanding military movements.
And the ancient legend of the Golden Fleece is tied to Lazique.
It is, although Procopius expresses skepticism about the local belief that the fleece was placed for safekeeping in Lazique itself, suggesting that if Jason escaped at Eudes, the palace and the fleece's location must have been separated by the Phesis River. It shows Procopius grappling with myth and trying to apply logic to historical geography.
He tries to figure out distances, too.
Procopius also discusses the circuit of the Black Sea, noting the distance from Chalkdown to Phasis as a 52-day journey for an active traveler, while also highlighting the difficulty of getting accurate measurements due to the barbarians living along the coast.
And the confusing currents in the straits, particularly the Bosporus, seem to have particularly fascinated him, leading him to observe and theorize about natural phenomena.
They did. He recounts the argument about whether the Black Sea effectively ends at Hieron due to the strong current flowing towards Byzantium, and the counter-argument that it's simply a straight phenomenon within a single sea.
He even mentions Aristotle.
He brings in the example of the ancient philosopher Aristotle, worrying himself to death, studying the famous reversing currents of the Europos straight at Chalkis, to illustrate how these natural phenomena puzzled even the wisest men. He also mentions the similar complex currents and sudden whirlpools, Charybdis in poetic myth, in the strait between Italy and Sicily, Messina.
He offers a physical theory for these phenomena based on observation.
Yes, drawing a key insight from physical geography, that converging headlands cause the water to be constrained, leading to this odd and unaccountable compulsion of the currents.
And he noticed something specific about the Black Sea current.
He adds a specific, vivid detail about the Black Sea current. While the upper current flows towards Byzantium, fishermen, using nets, discovered a deeper abyss current moving in the exact opposite direction towards Hieron, carrying their nets away. It's a wonderful example of Procopius using practical observation to try and understand the world.
Switching back to Italy, Procopius gives a truly remarkable description of the Appian Way, one of the great Roman roads, providing a key insight into the scale and durability of ancient Roman engineering.
It's clear he was deeply impressed by it, seeing it as a monument to Rome's past greatness. He describes leaving Naples by the Latin Way and passing by the Appian Way, made by Appius the consul 900 years before Procopius's time.
900 years.
He notes its length, a 5-day journey from Rome to Capua, and its breadth, wide enough for 2 wagons to pass comfortably.
But it's the construction that really amazed him, how it had lasted so long.
Absolutely. He details how the hard millstone was quarried far away, worked smooth and cut into polygonal shapes, and fastened together without concrete or anything else, relying solely on the precise fitting of the stones.
No concrete, just fitted stones.
He emphasizes how securely they were fitted, giving the appearance of having grown together. And the most striking point is its incredible durability. After so long a time, 900 years, and daily travel by wagons and animals, the stones haven't separated, worn out, reduced in thickness, or lost their polish.
Incredible.
Procopius calls it one of the most noteworthy sights, a testament to the engineering skill of a bygone era.
A lasting symbol of Roman power and ingenuity in the very land Justinian was trying to reclaim. He also mentions other ancient stone structures that impressed him, perhaps linking the present conflicts to the deep past.
He notes 2 examples of ancient ship structures made of stone, one near Kerkyra, Corfu, that some believe to be Odysseus's boat, though Procopius notes it's made of many stones and has an inscription to Zeus Cassius, suggesting it's more likely an ancient dedication.
Odysseus's boat made of stone.
Well, that was the legend. The other is a stone ship dedicated by Agamemnon to Artemis at Gerastos in Euboea, also made of many stones, with an inscription in hexameters, though most of it was gone by Procopius's time. These scattered details about geography, natural phenomena, and ancient structures offer fascinating glimpses into the world as seen by Procopius, broadening our understanding beyond just the military and political narratives.
And as we mentioned earlier, Procopius was not just reporting secondhand. He was present in Carthage during the mutiny.
Right, escaping in the boat.
And he mentions writing this history at the end of the first year of the Gothic War, giving us a time frame for his work. It's worth remembering that while he compiled information, much of this is a first-hand or near first-hand account, albeit with the inevitable biases and perspectives inherent in any historical work.
And the sources note that Procopius drew on others, like Pseudo-Joshua the Stylite for earlier Persian history, and that modern scholarship continues to study and debate his work, with figures like Caldelas, Cameron, Bury, and Heather contributing new perspectives and analysis to our understanding of this complex period.
It just underscores the depth of the material and the ongoing process of historical inquiry. So we've journeyed across the Eastern Front with Kavad and the cunning Chosroes, witnessed the rise and fall of the Vandal kingdom in Africa under figures like Geiseric and Gelimer, and navigated the complex, drawn-out Gothic war in Italy, from Amalasuntha and Theodahad to Belisarius' sieges and the dramatic campaigns and death of Totila.
We've seen the complex interplay of military strategy, political intrigue, the migrations of various barbarian groups, and the undeniable impact of individual character, the ruthless ambition of Chosroes, the adaptable brilliance of Belisarius, the tragic fate of Amalasuntha, the determined fight of Totila, all under the ultimate authority of Emperor Justinian directing affairs across vast chains.
And hopefully, by diving into these specific details and framing them as key insights, Belisarius' counterintuitive retreat strategy, Chosroes' deceptive plot against Ardugundad, the cunning fireships of Geiseric, the conflict over Athalaric's education revealing cultural divides, the ingenious aqueduct entry into Naples, Procopius' description of the siege engines providing technical detail, Totila's harsh speech to the senators revealing Gothic grievances, his later explanation of his strategy, the devastating symptoms of the plague illustrating the age's vulnerability.
Yeah, all those details.
The intricate details of barbarian plots and politics, the enduring structure of the Appian Way showcasing Roman engineering, the strange currents of the straits showing ancient observation of the natural world. We've revealed not just a sequence of events, but deeper insights into human nature, strategic thinking, cultural dynamics, and the physical world of the 6th century.
It brings us back to Procopius' reflection on fortune at the end of Totila's life, a fitting place to end our deep dive into his wars. How much of what happened was the result of careful planning and human effort, and how much was unpredictable chance or fortune at play?
How do moments of unreasonable daring, like some of Belisarius' bold moves or the unexpected success Totila sometimes achieved, or even strange natural phenomena like those complex sea currents, fit into our understanding of these grand historical narratives?
It's a question that Procopius himself wrestled with, acknowledging that these things are often incomprehensible, yet we constantly seek explanations for our ignorance. It's a fundamental challenge for anyone trying to understand history.
And that's something for you to mull over as you continue your own deep dives into the past. Thanks for joining us.